Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome CEO of the Milken Institute, Michael Klowden.
Thank you. And you've just seen a little bit about what we have at the end of the day today, just to keep you going to get there, since we have a lot more to go to there. We're off to a great start at this very special occasion, our 20th Milken Institute Global Conference. We're really delighted you can all be with us, not only here, but in the pavilion, out in the garden, and in the Beverly Hills Ballroom, where all the overflow crowd is. I can assure you, you are all having the exact same food that we're having here in the International Ballroom. The only difference is you're not nearly as cold as we are in here. Okay. As I said, this year's Global Conference marks a milestone for the Milken Institute because it's the 20th year that we've gathered some of the world's most influential men and women to discuss the challenges facing humanity. This conference also is significant because we've come together at a time when the need for free, respectful debate has never been greater. We are firm believers in the power of civil discourse and the need to listen, especially to those with whom we disagree. In their groundbreaking work on decision-making, Nobel laureate Danny Kahneman, who was a speaker at 2 global conferences, and Amos Tversky examined the influence of confirmation bias, our inherent tendency to seek the ideas and opinions and facts that reinforce our worldview. This unconscious rejection of opposing viewpoints is one of the reasons why in this era of easy communication and unprecedented access to information, the world has become so polarized. We at the Milken Institute are dedicated to trying to deal with that problem, and we hope in our own small way that this global conference can help people see past their biases and find common ground. We hope that we can inspire others to spend more time listening and understanding differing points of view. And as we like to say, we hope at the end of this 3 days, you'll see the world through different eyes. And in so doing this year, it's our hope that we can help people as they think about how you build meaningful lives.
What is a meaningful life to me and others? My guess is each person might have a different definition.
Having a sense of purpose, having a sense of personal satisfaction in what you're doing.
Hope and longevity and health.
For many people, a meaningful life is being able to provide food and shelter for your family, education, safety.
How can there be so many poor people at the same time there's so much abundance? And how could so many people be starving to death and so many others struggling with obesity? It's really about mismatched resources.
A meaningful life is one of the reasons I'm actually at the Institute. I want my actions and the actions of the people I work with to make a difference.
Our work is very much about the interconnectedness of things. You can't talk about jobs and having meaningful work if you're unhealthy and can't pay your bills if you're fighting cancer.
For our 20th anniversary, the theme of the Global Conference is Building Meaningful Lives. We've challenged all 4,000 people to think about, how do people feel their life has a purpose?
One of the amazing strengths at the Milken Institute is the ability to bring people together from all of the diverse sectors.
The chance to mix and mingle with people from the business community, from the science community, from politics and government, to try to figure out how we can move the needle in the right direction.
Folks actually come to us and say we're seeing issues around addressing malnutrition or clean energy in Africa, but we are seeing a funding gap. Can you help us figure it out?
We're not shy to say that capital is required to solve many of these things. The best ideas in the planet, unfunded, go nowhere.
Philanthropy is going to continue to be a bigger part of the conversation. Climate change to education to pandemic, flu. Philanthropy can take on a tremendous amount of risk.
I operate in a country where the kids are not in school. Women are not getting educated. It's dumb for me not to feel that I must do something about that.
Our goal is to not just try to be providing ideas that are new, but rather taking ideas to achieve results in the real world.
The 21st Century Cures Act was recently signed into law, very exciting to be a part of. It was a powerful statement of what can happen when there's a coming together around a common enemy, and the enemy in this case is disease.
There's dramatic changes in all industries. It's not just media, and it's not just healthcare, and it's not just manufacturing, but this is our challenge. The potential disintermediation of industries.
It won't be one company, institution, organization, but it'll be the collaborative that actually brings the solutions that we need.
We have been a good and strong partner to those that are in the field affecting change around the world.
We want to solve these problems so that the next generation that comes along is also feeling like they will have a meaningful life.
So for the next 3 days, we have a wonderful program for you. It'll focus on our mission and the 3 core objectives of the Institute: access to capital, job creation, and health. There are about 4,000 people who are going to be here this week. That, I will be honest, is more than we intended. We're not quite sure how we got there in spite of shutting off registration and turning down entreaties and large bribes. But we're still there. You're from 48 different states. We're going to put out a search party for 2 more states before Wednesday. There are more than 50, actually nearly 60 countries. And of the 750 speakers that we have on different panels, 75% were not speakers last year. So it's an incredible program that we have for you. Now, when you're trying to find out what's happening, the best way to do that is to download the Milken Institute app if you haven't done that. The app will have on it the latest information, including the full agenda, social media, content that you won't find in the printed program, and most importantly, the biographies of all of our panelists and speakers, which is why our introductions can be kept brief, so they're all there. Now, we're going to have robust social media connections as well, so you may follow that as well. And we know that many of the rooms, if you've probably noticed, will fill up. If there's something that's really important for you to attend, please get there early to get a seat. But if you miss a session, and you all will miss sessions just because you can't be in more than one place at a time, that you can watch for the email you'll be getting that recaps the day, because it's going to include a link as to how the attendees can watch the videos of the sessions if they miss. So you also can look in your bag for the wonderful Power of Ideas, the essay collection that we have put together for you. It's really fascinating, and it's actually great reading, so I urge you to look at that. Before we move on, I want to do some thank yous. I'd like to recognize and thank the hosts of a number of wonderful private events that took place over the weekend. Their names are up here on the screen. I'm not reading them, but we really do appreciate all of their efforts, people who've opened their homes up, and people who sponsored various events. So thank you to all of them. And a special thank you to our principal underwriter, Guggenheim Partners, and our presenting underwriter, SoFi. And this year's sponsors, conference sponsors, have been very generous, not only with their financial support of the Institute, but with their time and passion for working with us toward solutions. We'd like to pause and thank them, as well as our year-round strategic partners, because it's their efforts that make this conference and the work of the Institute possible. This global conference supports the largest single portion of the operating budget of the Institute that allows us to do all the wonderful work that we do throughout the year. So let's thank them.
The Milken Institute wishes to thank our underwriters, sponsors, and media sponsors for their support. Without their generosity, our work and the global conference would not be possible. Our principal underwriter, Guggenheim Partners. Our presenting underwriter, SoFi. Our platinum sponsors, Bearings, Bombardier Business Aircraft, Golden Tree Asset Management, Jefferies, Principal Financial Group, World Quant. Our gold sponsors, Apollo Global Management, BMO Financial Group, Canyon Partners, Citadel, Citi, CQS, Credit Suisse, EJF Capital, EY, Glex Global Holdings, PGIM, S&P Global, Schenkman Capital, Stone Canyon Industries, 2 Sigma. Our silver sponsors, AECOM, Ardagh Group, Ares Management, BlackBerry, Brookfield, Calamos Investments, the Carlyle Group, CME Group, Colony North Star, Crescent Capital Group, Herbalife Nutrition, Leonard Green and Partners, McKinsey & Company, Monte Rosa, NASDAQ, State Street, TCW, Toyota, Varde Partners. Our bronze sponsors, 21st Century Fox, Accenture, Amgen, Atlantic Investment, Bain Capital, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Brightstar Capital Partners, Brightwood Capital Advisors, Brunswick Group, B-Way, Canada, CIM Group, Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf, Deutsche Bank, Diamond Resorts International, Draper James, the Edgewater Funds, Fitch Ratings, Flywheel, General Atlantic, Generation Investment Management, Gibson Dunn, Goldman Sachs, Industrial Color Brands, JPMorgan Chase, Mauser, Moody's, Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, Pfizer, Royalty Pharma, United Talent Agency, Vista Equity Partners, Weiss, Wondros. Our media sponsors, Bloomberg, LinkedIn, Los Angeles Times. We thank our strategic partners for their significant annual support of the Milken Institute. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right, no Milken Institute event is possible, of course, without at least one quiz question. So we're going to ask you a question, which you're going to have a chance to answer by texting to Global 2017, enter 22333 to join, and then you text your answer, which will be ABCD. For those of you who get it right, we will be happy to give you a ride on the Bombardier plane that's parked just outside at the front of the hotel. You can go visit it to collect your prize anytime. And all the rest of you are happy to go look at it as well. So let's put up our question. Among the world's largest cities, which of the following hosts the largest percentage of its country's population? Is it Cairo, Egypt, A, Seoul, South Korea, B, C, Mexico City, Mexico, D, Tokyo, Japan, or E, Jakarta, Indonesia? So text whichever of those you think it may be. We're going to give you a few seconds now to do that. You have slow text fingers here. We'll give you another couple of minutes. All right. I think we've given you enough time. All right, so you've seen those, the results. Why don't you go back to those results again, if you could? If you go back for a second there. All right, a large number of you say Seoul. I guess you're probably influenced by reading the papers as much as you have and worrying about it. But let's see what the right answer really is. It's Seoul. And let's show the actual, you got it, right. All right, the actual numbers. You see with 47%, Seoul, South Korea, which I believe is 20 miles from the DMZ, 47% of the population. All right. See, I think we're about ready to begin. Am I right? Okay, good. All right, now we're going to start our luncheon program, actually almost exactly on time. We have today doing something a little different than we've done in the past. Instead of a panel, we have some very distinguished speakers, each very different one from the other as to what they're going to talk about and the way in which we're going to do it. And I know it's going to be engaging. I know it's going to be exciting. I'm looking forward to it myself as well. Now to start, I want to reference something that I talked about this morning, and those of you who were at the opening session heard me say this, but I think we owe a debt of gratitude to anyone willing to leave the comfort of their private lives to provide government service underneath the spotlight, because whatever our party affiliations, whatever our views are, the country, any country, is dependent upon the quality of those who are willing to make personal sacrifice to take on high public office. And we're delighted today to welcome as our first speaker someone who's been a longtime friend of the Milken Institute and somebody who's done just that, U.S. Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross, and he's going to be interviewed by another longtime friend of the Institute, David Rubenstein, who's co-founder and co-CEO of the Carlyle Group. David and Wilbur.
Thank you very much for coming today, Wilbur.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, when your friend Donald Trump called you and said, "I'm thinking of running for president," what did you tell him?
Oh, was my first reaction.
You tell him you didn't think a businessman from New York could get elected?
No, I told him I thought that he would do a terrific job if he could get it. Question was, could we make all the pieces fall into place?
And he said he could, and so you supported him in the campaign?
Yes.
And how did you first meet him?
Well, under rather adverse circumstances, back in the Taj Mahal bankruptcy, Carlyle and I were quite involved in the bondholder side. And when you meet someone under those circumstances, you really get to know what they're made of. And if you notice, both Carl and I came out of it sufficiently impressed that we've been his very active supporters since.
Okay, so you met him then where you were basically trying to take the Taj Mahal away from him, or?
Well, that was the initial reaction that we all had. But as I got to understand him, got to understand the magnetism of the name, and got to understand more about what really happened, both Carl and I concluded Taj Mahal was worth a lot more with Donald Trump, the man, and the Trump name than it would have been without either of the two.
Okay, so on election day, many people thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win, or at least some people on the Hillary Clinton side thought that she was going to win. You were with Donald Trump that day. Did you have any doubt that he was going to win that day?
Not really, because in the last few rallies of the campaign, like Minnesota the night before the election, 13,000 people waited from a rally that was supposed to start at 9 p.m. till 1 a.m., and they were still there, and there was still a line outside. And with that kind of enthusiasm, it was hard to imagine that he would lose.
Okay, so he wins the election, and does he say, I owe you something and I'd like you to be secretary of something, or how did that work?
No, well, I answered a help wanted ad that was posted by the White House, and he read it very diligently, and he thought my 100-word response merited hiring.
Okay, so he offered you the Secretary of Commerce position, but at the time you were already a prominent person in New York. You're running a major investment firm. You have a great life. Why would you want to go to Washington and deal with all the problems there?
Well, I had recently given up wearing horsehair shirts, and I thought some sort of penance would be in line with my long-time career, and I thought going to Washington would suit the bill very well.
Okay, so since you've gone to Washington, have you been disillusioned about anything?
No, actually, I've been heartened. I frankly thought that the quality of people in the government was not as high as it has turned out to be. There are actually quite a lot of very good, very serious, very intelligent, very experienced people wanting to do their best. It's just they've been trapped in a fundamentally dysfunctional system.
So have you found the egos on Wall Street to be bigger or smaller than the egos in Washington?
I think the ones in Washington have slightly sharper knives.
Okay. Okay. So historically, the Secretary of Commerce worried about business issues and promoting the business establishment, which it's appropriate for them to do that. But the president said, I want you to be my point person really on trade. So was that unusual, and is that something you asked for?
Well, I think the function of Commerce Secretary has varied a lot with the nature of the presidency and the relationship between the president and the secretary. And in my case, he had a very specific idea in mind in addition to running a department of 47,000 people.
47,000, and you control many different disparate things. You have NOAA, you have the Weather Service, you have lots of things. So
Census Bureau, the Patent Office, all kinds of things.
And do you get to meet all these people all the time, or?
Well, not so much one at a time.
Right. Okay.
Twosies.
So when the president was campaigning, he said, I'm going to renegotiate NAFTA. I'm going to get out of it, actually, get out of it. Now, he's recently said he would like to renegotiate it. Now, you're the point person on that. So what are you trying to get out of the renegotiation of NAFTA?
Well, the whole idea had always been to renegotiate NAFTA, and that's what we will do. The only reason we haven't done it yet is that there's a complicated process called the Trade Promotional Authority, the so-called fast track. Only the Congress of the United States would regard this process as fast track. We're already 90 days into it. We need now to get a letter accepted by them authorizing the next 90 days, and then we can finally begin negotiating. So that's what fast track amounts to in Washington.
All right, well, let's talk about TPP. The president said he didn't want to go forward with TPP, but are you going to replace what was going to be in TPP with bilateral agreements with various countries?
Yes, we think that there's an inherent couple of problems in multi or plurilateral agreements. The first one is they take forever to do. I think TPP took something like 10 years to get to where the countries could vote on it. Well, when someone spent 10 years of his or her life on one big project, they get so invested in the negotiation that the objective can very easily become get a deal rather than get the deal. So that's one problem. The second problem, let's say you're Japan and I'm negotiating with you, and I say, I'd like you to liberalize your agriculture. And you'll say, that's fine, but you must give me something in return. Then you go to Vietnam and say, I'd like you to liberalize something else. And they'll say, that's fine, but I need something for that. So what's the net effect? Japan now gets what it bargained for plus whatever Vietnam beat out of me, and Vietnam gets whatever it bargained for plus whatever Japan got. Do that over 10 or 12 times, and you got pretty badly beaten up.
Okay, so let's talk about China for a moment. The president in the campaign was fairly negative about China's impact on us in terms of the big trade deficit. Yet he had a meeting. I think you were at the dinner in Mar-a-Lago, And did the president say, well, I'm not happy with your trade posture, but if you help me with Kim Jong-un, I might be able to help you a little bit? And how did that work?
Well, the most bizarre thing about the dinner was obviously that just as dessert was being served, the president explained to Mr. Xi that he had something he wanted to tell him, which was the launching of 59 missiles into Syria. So it was in lieu of after-dinner entertainment that he staged that. And
was that the chocolate cake was supposed to be very good? Did that interrupt the chocolate cake that they were?
Well, the thing was, it didn't cost the president anything to have that entertainment.
Okay. So, right, is it true, though, that you might be easing up on China a little bit if they help a bit on North Korea?
Well, actually, we've been having some constructive discussions with the Chinese on the trade and other economic issues ever since the Mar-a-Lago. I think the big achievement from a trade point of view in Mar-a-Lago was normally people think of trade negotiations being denominated in years. We and the Chinese agreed to a 100-day period during which we would try our very best to make sure that there were some deliverables. Well, 100 days in the world of trade is like a wink and a blink. I think there's a pretty good chance that we will have some very satisfactory deliverables within the 100 days.
Now, our friends north of the border, Canada, they seem to be very friendly people. The president didn't criticize them in the campaign, but now you're imposing tariffs on their lumber. Well, why is that?
No, their behavior violating trade agreements and violating trade practices is what imposed the fine on them. We were just the instrument that delivered the news to them. We had tried very hard to negotiate a reasonable settlement. We didn't get anywhere, and so we imposed the 20% average tariff, which amounts to about $1 billion a year.
And that's going to increase, some people say, home prices in the United States. You think that's true?
Well, home prices in the U.S. have been going up very rapidly anyway because of the public enthusiasm about the Trump administration and because there was an underbuilding of houses for quite a few years. The total cost of softwood lumber as a percent of the average house is a relatively small fraction, and the amount of lumber coming in from Canada is only about 30% of the total. So it isn't like this is going to double the cost of lumber, nor is it going to double the cost of a house.
Okay. Well, what about milk? You're not happy with the Canadians' milk situation? They're producing too much milk? And is that true? I thought you weren't that happy with their milk.
Melon?
Yes.
Well, the melon issue is a new one for me. You see, being new at the job, I haven't heard about all the problems.
Okay. So let me ask you, today, when you deal with members of Congress, do they seem to understand these issues when you explain it to them, or?
Well, they do. It varies geographically. The northern border states, particularly toward the Pacific Northwest, understand it very well because British Columbia abuts them, and British Columbia is the source of about half the softwood lumber coming in and at least more than half of the problem. So those states are very conscious of that. Then there are a few not too conscious. Then you get to Maine, and Maine is very conscious of it.
So on the economy generally, are you reasonably optimistic that we can grow at 2 or 2.5% GDP this year?
Well, I would regard, well, this year is not a year we're going to have that much impact on because we haven't yet gotten the Obamacare repeal, haven't yet gotten the tax bill, haven't yet gotten all of the regulatory reforms. When we have a first full year that's got all these things in effect, I would be extremely disappointed if we're only 2.5%. Remember, Obama's the first president that didn't have a single year with at least 3% growth in a very long time. So if we can undo the shackles that were put on by regulatory, by energy shackling, fix the trade some, fix the tax code, and get rid of these horrible regulations, there's no reason the economy can't do a lot better than what it's been doing.
So since Donald Trump was elected president and since he assumed the presidency, the stock market's been fairly strong. Do you think the market is a little ahead of the economy?
Well, the stock market's job is to try to anticipate what will happen in the future. As you very well know, job of everybody on Wall Street is to look around the corner and try to guess before the next guy what will be on the other side. So it's natural that the market would anticipate developments in the economy. But I'll tell you, every business executive that I see, even ones who have some very specific complaints about what's going on, every one of them is very encouraged about the new president. And I was with him last Saturday in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and there was a huge auditorium filled with people. I would say there was even more excitement there 100 days after the election than there had been at most of the rallies during the campaign.
So you're a close friend of the president's. Does he like this job? Does he wish he hadn't taken it, or is he happy he has it?
No, he loves the job. There are obviously some obstacles that he has faced. It turns out the Republican Party is quite not as unified as we might have hoped, and it turns out the Democratic Party is more unified against us than we had hoped. So those two things at the extreme have been a little troublesome.
So you've traveled with him. For those who haven't had the privilege of being on Air Force One, what's it like in that plane?
Oh, it's quite amazing. It makes up for having to fly coach the rest of the time.
Okay. So today, your main mission is to renegotiate various trade agreements and also to help bolster the economy. And are you spending a lot of time meeting with business people? The president seems to be meeting with a lot of them. You obviously have your own separate meetings. Is that what you spend a lot of your time doing, meeting with business people to get their sense of what the government should do?
Oh, absolutely. And one good thing about the business community, it's not at all shy about expressing its interests and its desires. But we've also been meeting with the union community because unlike some business people, I have never viewed the unions as being my adversary. I view it as a partnership between labor and management, and they know that, and they've been very cooperative with us.
So do you find, since you've gotten this position, that people laugh at your jokes more than they did before, that people call you from high school and college, always told you they knew you were going to be a big success? Or
Well, the main thing that's changed is there are people whose names and faces I cannot remember who turn out to have been very dear friends.
Oh. Okay. So today, describe a typical day of what you do as Secretary of Commerce. You're in early, you're meeting with your staff, and...
Well, I can describe a typical day. Every morning starts out with a security briefing. I have to go to what's called a SCIF, a very restricted area, and all these signing for these top secret documents and all that. And that lasts for sometimes half hour, sometimes up to an hour. Then we generally have a very brief staff meeting. I'm not big on staff meetings. And then we'll start the series of meetings during the day. Foreign leaders, American leaders, business leaders from other countries. And then every now and again, there'll be the phone call summoning me over to the White House. And so then we get with the security and get in the vehicle and go on over. And so spend a couple hours a day generally at the White House.
And when people come to lobby you or to lobby the president, do they tell you what they think is good for the country or just what's good for their little company?
Well, you'd be amazed how many divergent views there are as to what's good for the country.
Okay. And on tax legislation, do you think it's realistic to have tax legislation this year?
I certainly hope so. And God knows the Congress has debated the issues for enough times. It's really a question, is there the willpower to do it? And if the Republican side can get itself unified, then it will work, even if the Democrats remain as determined as they seem to be to block any kind of progress. I'll give you an example. My own confirmation was really not that controversial. All the Democrats on the committee the Senate Commerce Committee voted for me, as did all the Republicans. But they delayed it 2 months, and then when the Senate finally voted, got 72 votes anyway. So what was the big deal? There was no reason to delay it 2 months. What I think maybe was happening is the reason they're slow walking the nominations is they're terribly afraid we might make this work better, and the more they can slow it down, the less danger that it will be a strong factor in the 2018 congressional races.
Was the pleasure of serving in government so great that you wish you had it earlier in your career, or you're happy to do it latter part of your career?
Well, I certainly would have been happy to have been able to afford it earlier in my career. But as it happened, it took me a while. I was kind of a late bloomer.
By the way, you were a specialist and probably the leading person in buying distressed companies on Wall Street and advising on them earlier. How did you happen to get into the distressed area? It wasn't something you probably thought you were going to do in college or business school.
No, what happened is a very bizarre thing. I went directly from Yale to Harvard Business School, and then directly from there into the Army. In those days, they had universal military training, and I needed the $100 a month that ROTC paid you while you were in school. So I then had to go 18 months in the Army. And while I was there, the man I was scheduled to work for, an early go-go money manager called Imre DeVay, literally the weekend before I reported for work, died. So, and he sold the firm on his deathbed to Robert Winthrop, very wealthy man from Massachusetts who'd been a client. So I already changed jobs once before I reported for work. And then for a variety of reasons, Mr. Winthrop pretty soon decided that he didn't like being an advisor, he liked better being a client. So he merged the firm with Wood Struthers, and it became Wood Struthers and Winthrop. So by the end of my first month, I had changed jobs twice, and I hadn't even moved my seats. So I thought, this Wall Street is a very dizzying place. And that was the best thing, and it's what got me going in distress, because they had a venture capital fund at DeVay. The Wood Struthers guys didn't want to keep it, so me being the youngest and most expendable person, they said, you get us out of this thing. There are only a couple of ground rules. No litigation, no more capital by us, and if you can do that in 3 years, then you'll get a very nice bonus. Well, so I did it in 2 years, and that was when I first learned how to fight with the banks and with other creditor constituents.
Worked out. So final question. I see you have very nice Wall Street shoes on, but when you went to the State of the Union address, the press reported that you had slippers on. There were special slippers. Can you describe where they came from and why you wore those?
Yes. I've never been regarded as a fashion plate before. This is apparently something that comes with high appointed office. What happened was, that was also the day that I was sworn in. And a friend of mine in Palm Beach, who's in the business of making those slippers, made them up specially with the Department of Commerce logo. And I figured I'm going to be standing up a lot because we're going to having to do a lot of TV interviews that night. So I thought I'd wear something comfortable. And I didn't realize that some beady-eyed reporter giving undercover new meaning, because it must have been under a table that they saw my shoes. And then the shoes took on kind of a life of their own. So
and now you can buy them on Amazon or eBay or somewhere?
Well, no, I've been thinking about auctioning them off for some charity.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time and for your service to the country.
Thank you, David.
This way? Okay.
Thank you very much for what was engaging, enlightening, and no slips of the tongue or of the shoes, for that matter. All right, as part 2 of our luncheon program, we're now going to hear a brief talk that highlights the theme of the conference on building meaningful lives. And we're truly honored to have with us today Yong Kim, who is the president of the World Bank Group. Please join us.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Among the great privileges that I have in my life is that I get to travel all over the world and talk to people from poor countries all over the world. Let's get this. Okay. Oh, sorry. Can we go back 2, please? Okay. All over the world I go, and I see this scene repeated over and over again. You know, many people are saying that broadband access is going to reach every corner of the earth. Everywhere I go, I see children in sometimes situations of enormous poverty looking at smartphones. What we know now is that increasingly, everybody knows how everyone else lives. Now, I had the impression that aspirations all over the world were going up. And so I asked a group of economists inside the World Bank group, can you do some research and tell me if this is really true? And here's what they found. It's very interesting. If you have access to the internet, your overall satisfaction, and this is based on Gallup type polls of satisfaction, your satisfaction with your own life goes up. But at the same time, you're more likely to want to migrate, to go to another country to live. The other thing that happens is your reference income, that income to which you compare your own, also goes up. So indeed, it seems like aspirations are rising, and so there is a convergence in the world. People around the world basically want the same things. And so I'm going to just talk for a minute about my own life, about the aspirations that brought me into this position, and how this compares with what we're facing in the world right now. So this is not my mother, but my mother actually had this very experience. She had to literally walk away from Seoul as North Korean soldiers were coming in, and she carried her own sister on her back. My father, at the age of 19, escaped from the northern half of Korea alone, without his family, and never saw any of his family members again. So I am the child of 2 refugees. Now, my parents, through lots of great luck and the kindness of strangers, both got scholarships to come to the United States when there were literally only a few hundred Korean students in the United States. They met, they married in New York City, my older brother was born, but then they went back to Korea, and my sister and I were born. And I remember life during that time as idyllic. I mean, we were relatively protected. My father was a dentist. My mother taught at the local university in philosophy and religious studies. And I remember it as a wonderful time when we were living in extended family, but also at the time, Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world. And there were demonstrations in the streets just about every day, actually just down the hill from where we lived. Korea in 1959 was thought by the World Bank, the organization I now lead, as being a basket case. Impossible. There's no way that Korea is going to grow. And the World Bank report actually said that Korea would find it difficult without foreign aid to provide its people with more than the bare necessities of life. Korea didn't get its first loan from the World Bank until 1963, because up until that point, it was felt that even the lowest interest rate loan, a 40-year loan at 0%, would be too much for the Koreans to be able to pay back. Now, at around this time, in 1964, my parents moved us back to the United States. And part of it was because they had seen what life was like in the United States. Their aspirations had been raised to a level that most Koreans just couldn't imagine. Now, the fact that my parents had such high aspirations is what brought us to the United States. But I just want to tell you that my parents' aspirations for us and our aspirations for ourselves weren't always the same. My mother was a philosopher, and she studied at Union Theological Seminary with great intellectuals at the time. My father was a dentist, a very practical man. So one day, I'll never forget, it was after my sophomore year in college. I was at Brown. I came home, and he asked me, "So Jim, what are you going to study? What do you want to be? What do you want to study?" And I said, "Dad, I've made up my mind. I'm going to study philosophy and political science, and I'm going to join a political movement." At that point, my father, the Korean dentist, pulled the car over to the side of the road very slowly, and he said, "Look, when you finish your medical residency, you can study anything you want." Now, I've told this story many times, and when I tell it to a mostly Asian audience, nobody laughs. Just shake their head. Of course, that's the right answer. Now, so I ended up hedging my bets. I did a degree in medicine and a degree in anthropology, so I did both. But I never lost the sense that I wanted to join a movement. So here is my very first trip to Haiti. I went to Haiti in 1988 with a couple of friends. We'd started an organization called Partners in Health. And we thought about what is the philosophical underpinning? What is the moral underpinning of the work that we're going to do? And we decided that it was going to be this notion of making a preferential option for the poor. Came from Catholic social teaching, but completely non-denominational and not religious. The idea was that we would always try to raise our aspirations to meet those of the poor. Here in Haiti, we thought, well, if you talk to the experts on Haiti, they'd say, well, only thing they can afford is vaccines and maybe some nutritional support. But what these villagers wanted was they wanted a hospital, they wanted schools, they wanted the same opportunities for themselves as, frankly, I had coming from Korea. I also really did a lot of my work in Peru, Lima, Peru. This is the squatter settlement in Lima, Peru, where I started my work. And what we did was, again, under the idea of a preferential option for the poor, we walked around and sat in people's homes and tried to figure out what their aspirations were. What we discovered there were patients that looked like this. This is Melquiades. There's recently been a film made about our work. It opened at the Sundance Film Festival, and Melquiades is a star. He had drug-resistant tuberculosis, thought to be untreatable in developing countries, but we began treating. And through very hard work by nurses, community health workers, we had extremely high cure rates. And I hadn't seen Melquiades for 10 years, and when we had our World Bank meetings in Lima, Peru, I saw him again. He'd become a confident young man, survived this disease. He survived this disease that the World Health Organization had declared a universal death sentence in any poor country. So we fought the World Health Organization, but more than any other group, we fought against the World Bank. Because the World Bank kept saying it's not cost effective to treat patients like this. It's too complicated, it's too expensive. We then met patients looking like this. This is Joseph June in Haiti. He has a very advanced HIV. And once again, we were told by the World Bank especially, but also WHO, that treating poor people for HIV was not cost effective. And we thought this was crazy because there's 25 million people living in developing countries with HIV. And we argued and argued and argued with the World Bank. I joined a movement called 50 Years is Enough, in which I was part of a group that tried to close the World Bank on its 50th anniversary in 1994. So we lost that argument, which was very good, I think. But we knew from our experience in Haiti that the medicines would work like this. And this is the outcome that we had in Haiti. This is Joseph June just a few months later. We call it the Lazarus effect of HIV treatment. Now, I just want to pay tribute right here to George W. Bush, because George W. Bush is the person who transformed prospects for African people. And you know, everywhere I go in Africa, people remember President Bush. We actually took these photos, my colleague Paul Farmer took these photos to the White House, showed it to the White House staff, and when they started believing that this could be done in Africa, President Bush made the commitment. Now, all this time, I was really arguing with the World Bank, and I wrote a book, Dying for Growth, and the argument was the World Bank is focusing too much strictly on GDP growth and not enough on investing in people. And I had kept up this critique, but over the years, since 1994, when on its 50th anniversary, the World Bank had been changing, and they'd been changing a lot based on evidence. And so this crazy thing happened. Here I was, you know, part of the movement to close the World Bank, and out of the blue, I was nominated to become president of the World Bank. Now, the vetting staff of President Obama read every page of Dying for Growth, and I thought I'd be disqualified, but I was not. And I walked into the building and saw this on my first day. Our dream is a world free of poverty. And so I said, okay, let's not dream anymore. Let's turn it into a target. So we have 2 targets: end extreme poverty by 2030 and boost shared prosperity. Make sure that the bottom 40%'s income is growing like everyone else's. Now, here are the things that keep me up at night that I'm most worried about. And here are the things that I'm here to ask for your help on. For the people sitting in this room, you may not know it, but you have a huge role to play in tackling these problems. Fourth Industrial Revolution, technology. We talk about it a lot at this meeting. Here's what worries me most about it. Our own estimates are that 2/3 of all jobs, 2/3 of all jobs in developing countries will be eliminated because of automation. 2/3 of all jobs. And you can see some of the numbers of individual countries. So low-skilled jobs, agricultural jobs, light manufacturing, will either be lost or will never come to poor countries. Here's the other thing I worry about: childhood stunting. Childhood stunting is very straightforward. It's 2 standard deviations below height for age. And we've done studies, and we now know that every child in the world, no matter where they were born, can grow 25 centimeters in the first year and 12 in the second. Stunting rates are astronomical. 38% of children in India are stunted. 50% of children in Ethiopia, about 40% across Africa. What we know, the brains on the, can we show the slide again? The brains on the right are normal children, and those are neural tracts. Those are neuronal connections. The brain on the left is a stunted child. They literally have millions of fewer neuronal connections every single day. These children, and we know from data, are not going to learn as well, and they're not going to earn. We know already that they don't earn as well. What are they going to do in a future that's going to be much more digitally demanding? Well, this is where all of you come in. 78 trillion is the size of the global economy. 8.55 trillion, as of about 6 days ago, was invested in negative interest rate bonds. 24.4 trillion invested in very low yielding government bonds, and 8 trillion literally in cash, sitting under very, very large mattresses. That's what exists today. Now, our hope is that by playing a completely different role as the World Bank Group, playing a role of helping the owners of this capital earn higher returns while at the same time creating opportunities in developing countries. This is urgent. It's urgent because aspirations are rising. We're losing jobs right now to automation, and we don't know if entire countries will be able to compete in the future. Let me give you some examples of how this works. This is the Queen Alia International Airport in Jordan. The Queen Alia International Airport, at first, King Abdullah and his team came to us and said, we want to take out a loan. We'll give you a sovereign guarantee, and we're going to use that loan, try to attract some private investors, and see if we can build an airport. And we said to them, you don't need to do that. It is commercially viable. We will help you do it completely on commercial terms. And the World Bank person who works with the public sector had to work against his own interest to move it over and let the private sector do it. Today, it would cost about $1 billion to build. They sold the license for a profit, of course, and over the last 8 years, they've received $1 billion in payment from the airport without having to provide a single sovereign guarantee, without making a single loan payment. This is what we have to try to do in every case first. This is the first step. We have to ask ourselves, can the private sector do it alone? Sometimes, though, the private sector needs help. In this case, solar energy in Zambia. The cost of solar in Zambia was 18 cents a kilowatt hour. But part of the reason is because auctions weren't done efficiently. The paperwork for putting an auction together didn't exist. There was not the kind of changes in government policy required. So we worked on all of those things, and with our approach we call scaling solar, the price went from 18 cents to an effective price of 4.7 cents a kilowatt hour. Electricity in Zambia costs the people around 20 cents a kilowatt hour, and we were able to bring it down. We're going to be able to bring it down dramatically. This was a commercial, an almost completely commercial play, with us just playing the role of being a convener. Now, my hope is that we can begin leapfrogging technology. We can do things that we'd never thought. This is Rwanda, and I was there, and I was launching a drone. The Zipline company, a group of brilliant, literally rocket scientists, worked with the Rwandan government, and now the Rwandans can deliver blood anywhere in the country in less than an hour. Now, in doing this, it was literally using artificial intelligence and the brilliance of a California-based company working with the Rwandan government that for the first time in the history of the world had drones delivering vital medical supplies in a country. Now, the question for us is, can we use technology in ways that we haven't imagined to help developing countries face the crises that they face? Let me end with just one quick story. So this is a recent visit I made to Tanzania. And as I always do, I visit schools, and I visited this particular classroom of 11-year-old children. I asked them, what do you want to be when you grow up? This particular young boy and one other young woman immediately stood up and said, I want to be president of the World Bank. Right? Just like you, my team and the teachers laughed. And I said, wait a minute. Let me just tell you a story. I was born in one of the poorest countries in the world. And when I was 3 years old, sitting in a classroom in Seoul, and you saw the pictures in Seoul, when I was a three-year-old in 1962, if George David Woods, who was the president of the World Bank at that time, had come to my classroom, I doubt he would have thought that one of his successors was sitting there. I told these children from Tanzania, don't let anyone ever tell you that you can't be the president of whatever you want to be. You know, the urgency of the situation is tremendous. If you have high aspirations and you have opportunity, things can happen like what happened to our family. But if you have high aspirations that are constantly frustrated, you have things like the Arab Spring. You have things like the rapidly increasing number of terrorist acts. You have countries living in fragility, conflict, violence. You have increasing numbers of countries who may be going down that path. It's an urgent task, but what we're asking of you is look at the tools we have. We have the lowest borrowing cost in the world. We're AAA, but we're borrowing at LIBOR minus 5 or 10 basis points. Our borrowing costs today are lower than the treasuries. We pass that on to countries. We can do guarantees. We do political risk insurance. We provide credit enhancement tools. There's so many things that we do, and we're shifting because our resources aren't enough to meet the aspirations of the people we work with. We need you. We think we can help you earn a better return than you're earning right now, and at the end of the day, do a lot of good in the world. Please work with us. What we've learned is efforts to institute equality of outcomes where everyone has the same outcomes has not worked. The two largest communist countries in the world have embraced that idea that it doesn't work. But if that's what we've now accepted, then what we all have to work for is creating equality of opportunity. And with your help, we know we can do it, and we know we have to do it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kim, for that wonderful and inspiring talk, which, as I said, was very much into the theme of the conference of building meaningful lives, as you most certainly have done for yourself and for others. Winding up our luncheon program today is a very special conversation we're delighted to be able to host. We have with us Dimon, who is the chairman and CEO of JPMorgan Chase & Company, and he's going to be interviewed by the wonderful Willow, who is the dean of the USC Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Hello, everyone, and thank you. Mr. Dimon, is it my imagination, are you absolutely everywhere these days? When you could be business is good, business is booming, you could be just the steward of that growth, basking in the accolades, and you are wading right in, visibly and vocally, into public policy. Why?
First of all, welcome to be here. Thank you very much to have me here. I think Willow's referring to that in my chairman's letter this year. I wrote about public policy. I think public policy is probably one of the most important things we get wrong these days. I went through that list of things that America has going for it, which is extraordinary. It's best ever out of respect for other countries, but we have all the food, water, and energy, peaceful and wonderful neighbors in Canada and Mexico, best military, low corruption, great rule of law, widest, deepest capital markets, best universities, some of the most innovative businesses, unbelievable can-do work ethic. But, and we got to hold these two thoughts in the head. They're both true. We have some serious issues. You know, we've had stagnant growth, stagnant middle-class incomes. You know, low wages haven't been keeping up with the living wage. Obviously, there are unsettled people. The job, and I went through a list of these too. The job participation rate, forget the overall one, just take 25 to 55-year-old men. It's gone from 96% to 86%, lowest of any developed nation. We have 20 million felons, which is terrible. They can't get a job afterwards. 35,000 people die in opioids. So I think there is a legitimate anger in the country. But my own personal view, and the bottom line point is, it's not secular stagnation. It's not because it had to be that way. It's not because it had to be the aftermath of the financial crisis. It's not because there's some mystery thing taking place with monetary policy. It's stupidity. It's bad public policy. Okay, we haven't built a major airport in the United States since Denver 20 years ago. China built 75 in the last 10 years. It takes 10 years to get the average permits for a bridge. Our inner city schools are failing to graduate half the kids, and those who graduate aren't prepared for jobs. 70% of kids between 17 and 24 cannot get into the United States military because they can't read and write, or they're obese or diabetes. 70%. Okay, so you know, it's understandable why people are kind of pissed off in this country. And my point is,
and is that why you're so vocal right now? Because you're kind of pissed off?
Yeah, because I'm a patriot. I love my country, and I think we got to start doing something about it. And it is nothing to do with Democrats and Republicans. I think the knee-jerk reaction we have between Democrats and Republicans causes the problem. We need facts and analysis. Competent people can do, get it done, fix it, and in a non-parochial way. Like, we got to make it work for everybody, not just a handful of people.
And do we need our business leaders to be more vocal and more active in the public policy arena?
Yeah. So here, you know, I do believe. I have something in common with those who blame the leaders of this country and the elite, which includes most of the people in this room. What I just talked about is us. So collectively, we are to blame. Collectively, the leaders should have done something. And so, I think business with government, civic society have to do it together. It can't be done by one without the other. It isn't possible. So real jobs, real education is going to take place at the local level where these businesses, machine tooling or engineering or plumbing or building constructor jobs, et cetera. And so we got to get our schools right. We got to get these things right. But it's not going to just take one or the other. It's not about money. It's about policy.
Before we get into Jamie Dimon's policy approach for the next 100 days, tell me a little bit about, so we've got your shareholder letter, right? For the first time, you had 20-some-odd pages on the issue of public policy. You are participating with other business leaders in this administration. You're on Trump's Strategic Business Advisory Council. Are you finding this White House and this administration receptive to candid dialogue? And yesterday I woke up and I said you were everywhere, because it seems like you have been. Yesterday I woke up. I was actually doing that really retro thing of turning the pages and reading a newspaper, you know, the thing that you turn. And there you were on the front page. New York Times report in the Business Council meeting. The president says, so you think China's manipulating currency, don't you? And you said?
No, they're not. Or if they are, they're manipulated up, not down. And yeah, so the answer is yes, he is listening. And I think, you know, before, when he was elected, I'm not even sure he really expected to be elected on that particular day. And I was not a Trump supporter, but they asked me to serve in this. I was criticized by a lot of people, including one of my daughters. But you better be voting for the pilot of the airplane. And I'm a patriot. I'm going to try the best I can to help the country. I was asked to do it. And I think it would make a difference. And I think I'm comforted. I think you should be comforted with the fact, you know, what's the first thing he did? He put top people on the ground, okay? And General Mattis, General Kelly, General McMaster, deeply respected by everyone that I know. And then you have Steve Mnuchin, Wilbur Ross, Gary Cohn, and others, deeply knowledgeable and respected. And I personally think this kind of concept that's grown up over time, that if you are successful and experienced, you shouldn't serve in Washington. And I disagree. I think these folks want to do the job. They want to fix it. They're not all experienced in Washington, which I'm not either. But so I'm comforted by that. And you've seen policy changes. You've seen most of the people who've spoken to the president, so I saw it myself, but would say They want give and take. They want strong people with good ideas, and they want to try to get these things done. You and I know it's hard to get these things done, but that's what they want to do. Yeah.
So what should be front and center on the agenda?
Well, it's another thing. Like, you know, someone said, how do you bridge the gap between how he ran, for, working class, white, rural, et cetera, and, he's seen a lot of CEOs, et cetera. And what I was told by someone in the White House was jobs. He sees that the most important thing is to create jobs and growth, and I think they are right. I think we can grow at 3%. I think the agenda is spot on right. Corporate taxes, again, this is us. We've been driving brains and capital overseas for 10 years. We knew it was happening. We all advised administrations before. Some of the damage is permanent because they bought companies or built plants overseas or moved research centers overseas. So corporate tax reform, and I heard Secretary Mnuchin say it on TV, or maybe Wilbur said it today, it's been shown that corporate tax reform both enhances growth and it actually increases wages. Infrastructure, spot on, I already spoke about it a little bit. Regulatory reform, not just financial, but just broadly. Let's take it just a deep breath, that no one's going to go back to the bad old days, no one's going to go back to like deep pollution, but some of these rules and regulations, if you went through them, I mean, honestly, they're sickening. They're stupid. The good old can-do American, get it right, change something, modify something, that's almost gone. And so I think it's absolutely right to get out of the way. You go, this is anecdotal, but it takes a year and 3 licenses to become a barber in New York City. Small business formation in this recovery is the lowest it's ever been in a recovery. Okay, and it's generally because of 2 things. Hard to prove this, but I think it's 2 things. Inability to access to capital, mostly startups, because I think existing businesses, that's not quite the issue. And the second is just the cost and compliance and regulation. It's just crippling some of these businesses. If you don't believe me, ask them. And I tend to travel a lot and see a lot of small businesses, and they'll tell you it's the #1 problem.
So which regulations would you start with?
Well, I think they're doing it right, which is cost benefit, 2 out, 1 in. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on the financial side, but they take mortgages. So here, you may not know, George McGovern ran for president, most liberal man who ever ran for president, lost in a landslide, went to run a small inn in Vermont or something, and wrote an op-ed article in the Wall Street Journal about 10 years after that and said, a legislator's dream is a businessman's nightmare. And it went through that all the stuff he did as a legislator passed the name of good, made it impossible for him to run that inn. OSHA, reporting requirements, rules, environmental, local files, federal files, state filing. And he ended by saying, and by not everyone who breaks an ankle on the sidewalk outside my thing was my fault, that the litigation is also crippling these small businesses. So I would start by reduce some of those regulations. In the mortgage side, we have not reformed mortgages yet. We did an analysis, and this is one example, and this has hurt average Americans and the very people that most of my Democratic friends profess to want to help. Because we haven't finished mortgage securitization, mortgage rules, there are 3,000 servicing requirements. The cost of mortgage is higher. Because the cost of litigation is so high, a lot of companies that make mortgages are unwilling to make mortgages with any extra risk. Think of lower FICO, younger, immigrant, self-employed, prior default. Okay? We estimate that would have been almost $500 billion or more of mortgages to those people. Okay? A third of those mortgages probably would have been new households, new homes, I mean. Okay? And that would have added 0.3 to 0.4% to GDP a year. A year for 5 years, how we made this change 5 years ago. That would have been millions of jobs. Household building would be way back up. But one thing, and it takes 7 regulators, and I'm not blaming each of the regulators, but the way we set up the system is it takes 7 regulators to do that, and they haven't done it yet. And they can do it in a week. It could be done almost in a week. And so I just think if they don't do it, they're hurting young people, immigrants, household formation, not me. They're not hurting JPMorgan Chase or Jamie Dimon. They're hurting our citizens by not dealing with these issues.
So the one change you'd like to see, if you had, this was your 100 days and you were going to put that forward, would be what?
On regulatory, I won't go through a lot of stuff that we got to relook at we did in banks, but it would be small business regulations. The president, I think, showed a chart, like it's a foot high of rules. They have to get approved to get one infrastructure project done. Now, I don't know how you change that, but I'm sure it can be changed if you have the good old can-do American attitude. So.
Talk about what you've seen in this outline of a tax plan. Pro-growth or pro-wealth?
First of all, we should do the right thing for America and not do the wrong thing because maybe you think it's going to help someone who's wealthy. So I think the most important thing is corporate tax rates need to come down, okay? And that will drive a lot of things. Carried interest will eventually go away. I think the president's right about that. I don't care if they change the top bracket on someone like me. It doesn't interest me at all. And I think the business should support something like on the other side, like the earned income tax credit. If you're a single woman with children and you're making $7 an hour, a little over $14,000 a year, the government will give you a tax credit of $6,000 at the end of the year. That program costs like $60 billion. 27 million people get it. It's lifted 9 million people out of poverty. I think we should double or triple the program, and it should include single men, anyone who's not earning a living wage, to lift people up to a living wage. Jobs bring dignity. That first rung in a ladder often leads to a second rung. People who start working continue working. People who have a job have household formation and they get married. We have a lot of social problems. It would be a great attack on that. It would be sharing the wealth of the country with those people who need a living wage. And I think, so I'm not talking about just corporate tax reform. I do that too. And by the way, Paul Ryan wants that, and the Democrats want that. So I think there are things we can do that for infrastructure, earned income tax credits, while we cut corporate taxes, that can help a lot of Americans.
You've been vocal that business should be involved in advocating for public policy, but they should move from beyond their parochial interests. Yeah. And you've called yourself a patriot. So give us some examples of what that would look like for a business, instead of lobbying for their self-interest.
So I'll give you an example, which is I became the chairman of the Business Roundtable, which is an advocacy group, and it is around tax and trade and immigration and all these other things. I told there's 200 large company CEOs. I told them, I'm not going to talk at all about bank reform here, because that's parochial. We should be talking about things that's good for all of America. And CEOs, most CEOs are pretty patriotic. So I'm going to give you all an example. How many of you are from New York and California? You should give that deduction. Okay, it's wrong that the United States government is financing profligate states like California and New York. It's been wrong for years. It's $1 trillion. It'll pay for a lot of things. It should be phased in over time. The Secretary of Treasury said today that you're going to get if they cut the top rate, you get some of that back. It's wrong. I hear people in New York say, well, it's just making up for the fact that we send so much more money to the federal government than we get back. That's because New York is very rich, as is California. That was meant to be that way. It shouldn't be made up with like these tax reforms. So as CEOs, it's kind of, yeah, like if you say we have some tax credits, I get rid of all of them for a 20% tax rate. Okay, all of them. And so I urge people, let's stop being so damn parochial and figure out what makes sense for the country and suck it up and do it. And and we need to do it because we've really gotten bogged down in this stuff. And again, it's us. We collectively have caused it, and we collectively are going to have to fix it, or we're sitting here in 10 years figuring out what went wrong with this great country of ours.
You have a reputation for being able to sniff out danger. That you have a radar where you can see trouble and
I see it coming right now.
And you've been able to steer your company through some pretty perilous waters. So if you got that radar trained on our future, what are you seeing that's concerning you most?
So I'm not going to go through geopolitics because you all read it and it's scary, and it usually doesn't have that effect. And it's kind of like cosmological constant, and often what comes and gets you isn't what you see. Even in major risk, you can think about what you want. It's usually something you didn't see. I always say there's a bullet coming up my head somewhere. It's just not in front of me. And therefore, the protection for those things is well-run companies, capital, liquidity, a lot of stuff that Dodd-Frank did do, by the way. So the real issue I worry about is this bad public policy. I think if we don't fix it, it's leading to terrible, in the body politic, terrible debate. We're leaving a lot of people behind. You see what's taking place around the world has similar issues. It creates meanness when it comes to immigration and meanness when it comes to a bunch of other things. So I do think the public policy thing is what has me most worried about the future. Not this thing here about technology. Technology is the best thing that ever happened to mankind. I mean, you all be living in a tent and hunting buffalo and dying at 35, but for technology. Okay? Your kids are going to live to 100. Okay? Most mankind used to work 7 days a week and 6 days a week, and now in America we're down to 5, probably 4.5. In Europe, they're already down to 3, generally. It's good. Mankind will adjust. They'll find other things to do as robots take place. And if it goes too fast, then we can have policies that can make up for it. So it's bad public policy, bad reactions to things where people are being left behind who have a legitimate complaint. I think there are legitimate complaints, about what we didn't do to help the problems of these folks. And loss of opportunity, as Jim said before, it's a terrible thing. And then those inner city school kids, it might be a Colin Powell, a Barack Obama, okay, and Albert Einstein, and you'll never know because we didn't give them the opportunity that most of us did have, and I think we need to do that. And if that costs a little bit of money, we should go do it anyway.
And worried about bad public policy, and based on what you've seen in the admittedly very early days of this administration, what public policy twists and turns are you most concerned about?
Look, I think you had this kind of change of administration, pro-business, pro these policies. Now you're going to see the sausage get made. So it's going to be great for the press. It's going to be up. It's going to be down. It's going to be gas. You're going to have all the pluses, all the minuses. The New York Times is going to say it's just for the rich. This was good. That's what it is. That's called democracy. It's going to be 12 months of this give and take, ugly stuff. But I'm hoping it can be bridged between EITC, infrastructure, what the Democrats want, what some of the Republicans want, and that we do the right things.
So did you tell me what you were most worried about? The sausage making? Was that?
No. It's just bad public policy. I mean, that's what worried me about Brexit. It wasn't that Brexit itself, is that what it means for someone, even the European Union. If someone leaves the monetary union, not Greece, by the way, but Italy or France, that's a real problem, folks. That's not a minor problem. Now, I'm not predicting it's going to happen, though. If you were my board of directors, what I always tell my board is we have to be prepared for it, whether or not it's going to happen. I'm not betting on, oh, no, don't worry about this. No, I have to bet on it. So we have to prepare for bad events in spite of
that radar thing again.
Yeah, well, it's a way of thinking. Okay, so we're a big bank in China. I prepare for the worst. I don't expect it to happen. I think China will be a large developed nation in 30 years, housing 40% of the global Fortune 3000. But there's a small chance it doesn't happen that way. They've kicked out all foreigners twice in their history, in the 1300s and Mao. They might do it again. So if you're a shareholder of JPMorgan Chase, I just want to tell you, we'll be fine. It'll hurt. It won't be a good year, but we'll make money. Okay, and that's how we run the company. That here are the probabilities, and we want to be able to handle all set of them, because otherwise, you're taking too much risk.
No. Given how passionate you clearly are about the public policy arena, given how engaged you are, would you consider civil service? Would you consider serving your country
I think your
in
husband
office?
should do that.
Not with this wife.
Not with my wife either. It's too late for me, okay? I don't want to be a mayor, senator, governor. Most of these people in politics, somewhat for good reason, have been doing it their whole lives. President Trump is the first president who didn't serve in the military or hadn't had a fairly extensive political career. And I just think it's hard to do. And you gotta start early. I always say, Barack Obama was running for president the day he graduated college.
But this president...
he wrote 2 books about himself before he did anything.
But Jamie, this president... But Jamie, this president has clearly proven that there's a new way, and you are not too old.
That may be true, but just because he did it doesn't mean it opened the door for someone else to do it. And so I just don't think it's my cup of tea or my specialty. I think the best I could do for my country is do what I'm doing right now, and that's it.
Okay. Last question. I know something that you and I were talking about earlier, that you are proud of the progress you made. Not quite talking about succession planning at JPMorgan, but 30% of your top 200 employees are women?
That's correct.
And 30% of your direct reports are women?
Correct.
So what are the chances?
20% LGBT.
20%?
Yeah.
How did you do that?
I think the door to diversity is trust and respect and openness, and everyone knows that everyone's going to be treated equally and fairly. You can have special programs, but and our women, they're unbelievable, and they have these programs called Women on the Move and Women Here, and I always tell them, if I had a program just for men, I'd probably be kicked out of my job. But they are smart, they're dynamic, they're leading the charge themselves, and I think they feel treated very equally in the company. And then lots of little things to do, like this goes back years ago, like on pay and promotion committees, make sure they're staffed with women too, so the other women feel it was fair. And they have someone to go talk to if they said this wasn't fair. And so there are a million things you can do. Oliver Wyman had done a report saying you won't have 30% in the executive suites on Wall Street for, I think it was 30 years. Well, we already do. I've been trying to get the press to write that. I called them up. I offered it. They have no interest. You know, in writing something like that.
So what are the odds that the next CEO will be a woman? 30% or greater?
I think it's got a pretty good odds. I mean, the good thing, JPMorgan is stocked with talent, okay? And so it depends when I leave, when I get hit by that proverbial truck, which isn't my preference, but that will depend on the time. But I think there are several people in the company who can succeed me, okay? And I think there are several women in the company who are or will be on that list.
Okay. Well, we haven't ruled out a run for office or greater visibility for you, so we're gonna leave that open. We'll get a woman in the CEO job, and then we'll be done. We'll be great.
Right.
Jamie Dimon, thank you.
Willow, thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Folks, thank you very much.
It's been a wonderful lunch. Enjoy the rest of the day. And we'll see you tonight at our dinner program and late night.